We need to meet a new constraint, and that constraint has to do with CO2. CO2 is warming the planet, and the equation on CO2 is actually a very straightforward one. If you sum up the CO2 that gets emitted, that leads to a temperature increase, and that temperature increase leads to some very negative effects. The effects on the weather, perhaps worse, the indirect effects in that the natural ecosystems can't adjust to these rapid changes, and so you get ecosystem collapses. Now, the exact amount of how you map from a certain increase in of CO2 to what temperature will be and where the positive feedbacks are, there's some uncertainty there, but not very much. And there's certainly uncertainty about how bad those effects will be, but they will be extremely bad. I asked the top scientists in this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze under. This is something that has to get to zero. Now, we put out a lot of carbon dioxide every year, over 26 billion tons. For each American, it's about 20 tons. For people in poor countries, it's less than 1 ton. It's an average about 5 tons for everyone on the planet. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero, and that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Leaders talking about a new world order. And for most of us, when somebody speaks about a new world order, we visualize a better world, a world where we have, we live a much more prosperous life, free of oppression and the like. But actually, the idea of a new world order is not new. It is very old. Basically, it is about having a world government. We should abolish all states, all nations, all borders, but instead have only one world government. And that world government is to be by certain people, elites, people who are very rich, very intelligent, very powerful in many ways. They are the ones who will govern the world. There was not much talk about democracy or choice of leaders. Instead, there was to be a government by these elites who will impose their rules on everyone in this world. And for those who are unwilling to submit to them, there will be punishment. This is the concept initially, but many have not read or do not know about this concept. But it is important for us to remember that this new world order is an old world order. It's something that was conceived more than 100 years ago. And yet it is being repeated by powerful politicians from powerful countries that it is new. we should be asking ourselves whether the people who originally conceived this idea has given up hope on achieving a world government. If we study carefully recent history, we will know that there are people who still wish to set up a world government where this government rules the whole nation, the whole world, without regard for nations or states. There would be no borders. And when I say no borders, I'm quite sure you remember lots of talk about globalization and a borderless world. Globalization and a borderless world is an expression that relates to the concept of the New World Order as it was first conceived. We live in a world today that is dominated by the powerful, the mighty, the people with the guns, accepting that the guns now are much more sophisticated. We have reached a stage where certain people have arms which could wipe out the population of this world. The nuclear weapons have that capacity. And the nuclear weapons are in the hands of certain countries and certain people. Therefore, the world is frightened of them. And when the world is frightened of them, the world becomes submissive to them. And when the world submits to them, effectively, there is one government in this world. What we are seeing today happening in the Middle East, happening in many other countries, including in Malaysia, where interference is being made in the political process of this country, all these are in the interest of establishing the New World Order. Now, would this bring peace to us? Or would it cause wars to be fought in many places? We already see wars being fought in the Middle East, wars were fought in Vietnam, and in many other parts of the world, because of the need for the people who are promoting the New World Order to establish their government of the world. And not only wars, we see all kinds of subversion taking place, undermining our moral values to the extent that we become helpless, unable to do anything. And the peace that we will get from this is the peace of the graveyard, because the intention also is to reduce the number of people in this world. At the time when the New World Order was enunciated, the population of this world was only 3 billion. The intention was to reduce it to 1 billion. Now the population of the world is 7 billion. There will be a need to kill many billions of people, or to starve them to death, or to prevent them from giving birth, in order to reduce the population of this world. This is what is in store for most. For those who will suffer and die, there will be the peace of the grave.